Son's blessed Trinity. It is great to see everybody today. Have a wonderful audience, and we are so very, very thankful for your presence. And I appreciate you joining in on the last song that we just sang. As you mentioned earlier in the week, there were several Christians that were killed in the tornadoes down in Cookeville, Tennessee area. And amongst those that perished in that storm was a little boy named Sawyer. He was the grandson of the preacher Rodney Pitts. And his daughter and her husband and their child all perished in that tornado. And there was a clip on Facebook earlier this week that song was one of Sawyer's favorites. And there was a clip of the family if we would cut that song. Most difficult moments ago. Usually, whenever there was going to be some kind of a team, captains began to choose those that were only on a team out of necessity. They were the ones that, there's a groan goes up when their name is called because no one wanted to get stuck with them. I've been on some of those teams not having a whole lot for the captain to kind of help you fade into the woodwork, so maybe we can skip you and move back to the top of the order and win this game. Yeah. And so you were quite frequently that odd man out that was the last to be chosen. And it wasn't a fun place to be, because it was very obvious that you didn't measure up in lots of different ways. And for the norm of what they wanted in terms of a outstanding performance athletically, you weren't going to be able to contribute very much. You were the proverbial placeholder that had to be put somewhere, and if they couldn't put you as a scorekeeper or a manager, at least they put you at the bottom of the order. But it wasn't a whole lot of fun to be amongst the last ones chosen. Well, Jesus gave us a parable about that over in Matthew chapter 20 that I want to talk about for a little while this morning. Because Jesus helps to teach us some things here that I think are quite appropriate, fitting, and needful as we think about everybody's rightful place. In Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard." So here we find the householder looking for help. It's harvest time in the vineyard. Good help sometimes can be hard to come by, because there are some laborers who are lesser skilled, shall we say, than others. But here we've got the eager beaver, shall we say, Those individuals who are out there at the crack of dawn, hankering to find a good job because they want a good day's pay. They are talented, they are able to do the work, they know that they have such necessary skills, and so they are more than ready to be the first ones on the truck, so to speak, to go to whatever the job site would be to do the work that needs to be done. They make a fair wage with them. A penny a day or a denarius a day would be a standard day's wage for a laborer in this generation. And so they now have gotten their good job with good pay and a good opportunity to excel and to do that which was necessary to help this owner of the vineyard in his work. But then the owner of the vineyard goes out again. In verse 3, he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. So now you have these early risers that probably were in the field around 6 o'clock or something like that. And now he goes out at the third hour, which would have been about 9 o'clock in the morning, and he finds some people who are still looking for work. He still could use extra helpers in his vineyard. And so these folks are hired and sent out there as well, simply being told that whatsoever is right, I will give you. But then this man goes back again later. In verse 5, he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did likewise. So here he goes out about noon and finds some available helpers, and he sends them to his vineyard. Maybe they had some other obligations that morning. Maybe there were some other tasks at home that they needed to do. Maybe there were other complicated situations, but they're out at noon looking for a job, and he is able to recruit them to come to his vineyard, as well as the ones that he finds in the 9th hour. Now, these are the ones that are at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But still, he finds them having a contribution that they can make, and he hires them to go work in his vineyard. We might call these the reluctant learners. They're realizing that maybe they're not quite on top of things, like those eager beavers that were there early in the morning. Maybe they are overburdened with way too much to try and do. Maybe they're just not quite as work-brinkled as those ones that were out there at 6 o'clock in the morning. But nonetheless, they make an appearance, and they are willing to go into the vineyard. Some of them may have been just downright stubborn to a point. The idea that I'm going to work on my terms, and I'll go to work whenever I'm ready to go to work. There are people like that, you know. They want to do things their way. And we find in the story of the prodigal son over in Luke chapter 15 that kind of summarizes the initial attitude that the youngest son had when he demanded his inheritance, and he knew what needed to be done, and he was going to leave, and he went off into a far country. And it wasn't until he kind of hit the wall and realized that he'd not planned prudently, that he had wasted his substance in his riotous living, and he had no one to look out for him, no one to help him. He'd made a whole string of very bad decisions. And he finally came to himself and went back home. Maybe some of these laborers were in that category, that they just didn't think it was necessary to have to go out there so early in the morning, and they were going to work on, we just don't know all of the details as to why these were the ones who were chosen later. Obviously, they're not the cream of the crop. Obviously, their talent and their skill and their thirst to work was somewhat in second place compared to those ones who were out there early in the morning and the very first ones that were to be hired. But the parable doesn't end there. Going down to verse 7, he says, in talking to these individuals, He brought us back up to about verse 6. He said, about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, why stand ye here all the day idle? And they said unto him, because no man hath hired us. He said unto them, go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. The 11th hour. Here you are getting to individuals that are being hired to work at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The Jewish day pretty much ended at 6. And maybe if there was a press for the harvest, it might go a little bit later, even on toward dark. But even then, you're only looking at 2, maybe 3 hours of acceptable labor out of these people at all. Why is that? Well, whenever he talked to them about them standing here all the day idle, they had an explanation as to why this was the case. And it doesn't seem to be that they were lazy and too sorry to try and get a job. But rather what they say here in talking about their condition is that there was just no man that would hire. Stop and think about that for just a moment, and we begin to understand what their problem was. These individuals may have been there since earlier in the day, but they didn't catch anybody's eye. They didn't have the abundance of skills that made them a prime candidate to be hired. Maybe they were too young. Maybe they were too old. They weren't going to be able to be very worthwhile contributors in compared to all of the other folks that could be in that labor force. It may be that some of these folks were handicapped in one way or another. They didn't have full use of all their capacities. And since they had limited capability, they were looked over by everybody else when it came to being hired to do the job in the vineyard. It just didn't look like they could do very much. But this householder saw a place for it. Even though they may not be able to contribute as much as those that have been out there since the crack of dawn, or even those who went out later in the day. Still, this householder said there's something they can do. There is something that will be worthwhile. And even though they are broken, even though there are various reasons, there's no implication here that these individuals hired at the 11th hour were there just because they wasted a day and been too lazy. There was just nobody that you knew. Nobody that would take them to go and to work in the vineyard. Now notice what this man's been saying all the way along. Now he had made the deal with those eager beavers early in the morning. I'm going to pay you a full day's wage. You're going to get a penny a day. But as we look to those ones that came on later, up in verse 4, he simply said, whatsoever is right, I will give you. And the same thing is repeated down in verse 7. Whenever these broken folk said that there's been no one to hire us, he said, you go into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So he's made a promise that I'll take care of you. I'll give you whatever's right. And he let it go with that. There wasn't some detailed explanation. There wasn't a contract with a signature where he is obligated to do whatever. He has simply said, I'll give you whatever's right. And you know what? All of these workers, I believe, were thankful for that. It's more than what they had as they were standing in the marketplace. Whatever it would have been, regardless how small the amount might have been, it was something. And they were willing to head to that vineyard and to do whatever it was they could. But then it comes time to square up as we get to the ending of the day. And let's see what happens in verse 9. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. Can you imagine how amazed they were? A full day's wage? I haven't been able to get a full day's wage, and I don't know when, if ever. I have been really blessed here that I was chosen and allowed to do whatever it was I could do. Wow. What a reward I have been given. And so we find that he continues on, and he pays each one, and every man is receiving a penny. So when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. That wow factor's gone. I mean, I've worked all day, and I saw what you gave all those other guys, and I'm only going to get a penny, even though that was the deal they had agreed to way early in the morning. It had seemed fair to them way early in the morning. But now, in comparison to all these others, this just isn't right. You know, sometimes we can use the word scandalous grace, and it kind of applies in a situation like this. The householder was willing to be gracious to all of those employees that came and worked in his garden, or in his vineyard. And he pays them all exactly what he had promised. But often we can be resentful of the grace of God because, wait a minute, I see their situation and then there's me. And I have done this and I have done the other. And I certainly should be in higher favor. And I should certainly have more advantages. And I should be put higher on the pole. Because after all, you know, look at all I've done. But we find here that this householder deals with that in verse 11. When they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house. Oh, doesn't that happen? Look at this. I've been cheated. I've been mistreated. This isn't fair. We are so quick to throw those words around when we think that we should have been given a better deal. Saying, these have brought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden of the heat of the day. Now, don't you realize that we've been your prize workers? We have been the ones who have labored. We have been there to sweat all day long. We are the ones who really put forth prime effort. We are the great ones. And you're paying us just like them, the broken ones, those who only worked an hour, and you're paying us as much as you gave to them? My, that's just not fair. He answered them in verse 13 and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Wasn't that the deal? Wasn't that what I said I was going to do? Take that is thine and go thy way, and I will give unto this last even as unto thee. He said, I have every right as the employer here to do whatever I want to. And is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? And is thy eye evil because I am good? You see, that's where the trouble sets in. These eager beavers got upset. They were all undone because of the generosity of the householder, the employer. He was the one who could have decided not to pay him at all. He could have chipped them out of a whole day's worth of salary. But he was honorable to what he had promised to do. And if he wanted to be benevolent to those broken laborers who had given it their best shot but for an hour, maybe he saw that was all they had the capability to handle, all that they could do. And certainly it was going to help them out because nobody had hired them. They had no chance. Here was something he could do that would be looked at as a good work for those broken laborers from the 11th hour. And so Jesus then pulls all of this together. He said, so the last shall be first, and the first last. For many are called, but few are chosen. You see, sometimes we get kind of the inflated view of how great we are and what we are owed, when that's not the situation at all. Over in Luke chapter 17, Jesus taught on another occasion about the fact that whenever we're doing our duty, it's still not a whole lot to brag about. He says in verse 7 of Luke 17, but which of you having a servant plowing or feeding cattle will say unto him by and by, when he is come from the field, go and sit down to meat? And will not rather say unto him, make ready wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself, and serve me, till I have eaten and drunken, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink? Does he thank the servant because he did the things that were commanded of him? I trow not, or I don't think so. So likewise ye, when you have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we're unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. We just did the stuff that was expected. We just did the things that we were capable of doing. It's not that we have in some way turned the world upside down, turned everything inside out. We have become the super prize employee or the super prize person that God should be honoring far and away above everybody else. No. We're doing what is our duty to do. Because God is blessed and God has helped us to deal with our situation, and we can never repay all that He's done. But the fact is, we can all rejoice in that last statement that Jesus made there in Matthew chapter 20, going down to verse 16. So the last shall be first, the first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen. You know, there are some people who obey the gospel in their youth and spend 40, 50 years in serving God. There are other folks who maybe don't obey the gospel until they are well into their twilight years. I saw an article recently of a man being baptized in a hospice unit because he had just finally come to the conclusion he wasn't ready to meet God. It was one of the last actions that was performed before he passed from this life. Whenever Jesus here is teaching about this situation with these laborers, if we back up just a little bit into the 19th chapter, Jesus here has been talking about the idea of the wealthy and how hard it is for them to enter the kingdom of heaven. And in verse 27 of Matthew 19, then answered Peter and said unto him, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? It's all about me. What are we going to get for all of this? And Jesus said to them, verily I say to you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold and inherit everlasting life. But Many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. God is teaching both the apostles and then teaching in this parable of the man who owned the vineyard that God will take care of the ordering of things. It's not a matter of there being big I's and little U's, and some important Christians and some not very important Christians. But regardless how broken our lives are, we've been called. We go over to Ephesians chapter 1, going down to verses 3 and 4. We understand that in God's great love, He didn't leave us in the marketplace just standing, being rejected with nobody to employ. In Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, Paul says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who hath blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ, according as He hath chosen us unto Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before Him in love." Yes, He's put together the arrangement in which we can be redeemed. And we've been chosen, not because of our merit, not because we've made perfect choices all the time, not because we've maybe had a good attitude and we're kind of in that eager beaver category. He chose us for what we could do in service unto Him. Over in John 15, just going down a couple of verses from where Horace read this morning. In John 15, verses 16 and 17, Jesus said, "Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatsoever you shall ask of the Father in my name, He may give it you. These things I command you, that you love one another." You see, we've been chosen. The opportunity of eternal redemption has been set before us. And there's no life too broken for Him to use. And sometimes I've encountered individuals who said, "Preacher, you just don't know the mess I've made of my life. All the things that I've done wrong, all the ways in which I've put off doing what God wanted me to do, all those times I was way far afield from anything called righteousness." And the Lord said, "Come work in my vineyard. There's still a place for you." You know, we don't need to be ashamed of the fact that our lives may have some blemishes along the way, because He can teach us what we need to know and help us rise above the adversity. I kind of like to think in the parable He's teaching that you can almost see some of the managers of those workers helping the 11th hour people to do the best they could do, to be the best that they could be. And that's what we try to do in every situation, is to help all reach their potential in serving God. For after all, the invitation goes to everybody. In Revelation chapter 21 and going down to about verse 10 beginning, we find that, or let's back up to the 22nd chapter in verse 17, "The Spirit and the bride say, Come. And let him that heareth say, Come. And let him that is athirst come. And whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely." Just as that vineyard owner kept going back to the marketplace and saying, "Who can find?" so it is with us as we carry the message of the gospel. It's to reach everybody that we can find, to help them see there's a place for them in the vineyard. There's something that you can do, regardless how broken your life is, regardless how limited some of your skills and abilities may at first appear to be. You don't know what God can do for you. And we don't have to be ashamed of the fact that we are amongst the last chosen, for whatever reason that we've put off obeying the gospel of Christ. I was over in Revelation chapter 2 in talking to a congregation that had problems at Smyrna we find that the angel is writing, saying, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried. Yet you shall have tribulation 10 days, but be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death." I don't care where we are in life, young or old. I don't care what our skill set is in terms of how strong we think we are in service unto God, or how we feel so woefully inadequate and ignorant relative to the Scriptures. The fact is, the Lord's calling and giving an invitation saying, "I've chosen you. There's a place for you, and there's work that you can do." But it all begins by our getting up and going into the vineyard. By our agreeing to that call. In a spiritual way, you agreeing to be baptized for the remission of our sins, to arise to walk in newness of life, a soldier of the Lord, a member of God's family, a worker in His family. This morning, if those are some steps you need to take, if we can help you, won't you come? Together we stand.